let us enter into the spirit of worship with our introit.
Hi, I'm Jim Schubert, music director. I'm going to be playing two pieces today by Amy Beach, who's a wonderful composer who you may or may not be familiar with. She lived in Boston in the late 19th, early 20th century. These two pieces come from a suite she wrote called Eskimos. And at the time, there was a music journal. Someone had transcribed the chants or the folk songs of the native Inuits in Alaska and the Northern Territories. And she was inspired by those folk songs and wrote pieces based on them. So the first one's called With Dog Teams, and later on I'll play another one called Arctic Night.
Thank you. I can just feel the cold and hear the dogs pulling the sleds through the snow. That was wonderful. Thanks. Please turn in your gray hymnals to our responsive reading number 733. It's the very last one in the gray hymnal. Out of wood and stone, out of dreams and sacrifice, the people build a home. Out of the work of their hands and hearts and minds, the people fashion a symbol and a reality.
We make this house be truly a place of meeting, meeting one another in warmth and joy and openness, meeting one with another in courage and love and trust.
May all who enter here trust one another so surely that they dare to shape the deep fires that burst into anger as much as the sweet spring waters that swell into laughter, the slow erosion of wounded tears as much as the soaring song.
May these walls of silence as the hungry hearts search inward, each for its own small spark of hope, like others snuffed out in moments.
May these rafters hear the voice of the child as surely as that of the orator, and the sound of the lute, the clack of the typewriter, the swish of the broom, and know that all are as holy as the shout of a million stars.
May the rain fall lightly on this house, the sun shine warmly, the winds blow softly, and bless it as the waves of joy and peace.
Thank you. Here ends the reading. And let me introduce myself again. I'm Reverend Sarah Person. I am the minister of your sister church in Middleborough, Massachusetts. And that's where Reverend Boak is this morning. She's in my pulpit. So we're doing an old-fashioned pulpit exchange. Haven't done those in a little while in this neck of the woods. But I'm very, very glad to be here, and thank you. And thank you, Reverend Boak. Our opening hymn this morning is hymn number 1000 in the Teal Hymnal. And please rise as you are able. Thank you. Find our prayer today printed as an insert in your order of service on the flip side of the insert. Prayer of the farm workers' struggle. Show me the suffering of the most miserable. So I will know my people's plight. Free me to pray for others. Help me take responsibility for my own life. So that I can be free at last. Grant me courage to serve others. For in service there is true life. Give me honesty and patience. So that the Spirit will be alive among us. Let the Spirit flourish and grow. So that we will never tire of the struggle. Let us remember those who have died for justice. For they have given us life. Help us love even those who hate us. So we can change the world. Amen. And now let there be an offering to sustain and strengthen this place, which is sacred to us, a place of memory and hope, and a force for justice in the wider world.
Oh
Stille Nacht. Winter, for many of us, means calmness, stillness, a time of quiet, a time of peace. But for the rest of the world, particularly this year, winter means death. You've heard our congregations called covenantal communities, and some of you may have wondered what that meant. A covenantal community is a community that gathers not by creed, but by choice. A community that agrees to be with each other in ways that honor certain principles and values. A community where we may treat one another with loving care when it's called for, but also respect for each other's differences and with compassion for the journey that we all face. But most importantly, a covenantal community treats one another with as much love for the truth as we can bear. We all have our own journeys to make and our own ways to get there. The promises that we make to each other help us manage our fears of the journey. And that is the heart and core of what we are about in a covenantal community, to raise the good and to work to banish the fear that leads to hate. And we have never been more necessary than we are today. Since this past fall, there have been devastating attacks in Europe, America, and the Middle East that have killed hundreds and injured hundreds more. These attacks have been committed by organized radicals, radicals who strike within First World borders. And these radicals have no allegiance other than to chaos. These events have sent us hurtling down a road that we have already had defined for us by generations of fear. Stille Nacht. There are more than 160,000 refugees in Greece and Italy waiting to be relocated to the 28 members of the European Union. In the wake of these attacks, their situation has become more dire. Winter's toll on these refugees has been devastating. I'm struck by the fact that the day-to-day lives of First Nations, our lives, don't suffer and change course dramatically when these things happen, unless we are victims, unless we are part of armed forces sent to intervene, or unless we are immigrants who are caught between two worlds. This is the real human toll of terrorist activities, not on our day-to-day lives, but on these victims, on the defenders, and on those who are caught between two worlds. It is also the human toll of our politics, of our political efforts to respond to fear that terrorism ignites. The origins of this violence are complicated. Maybe at one time we thought that there might be something justifiable about them, but they have become so bathed in evil that they are nothing more than hatred. Our entire immigration system, evolved out of fear. It was not out of economic necessity. At the turn of the 20th century, America was still the land of opportunity. You know what? And for hundreds of years before then, the doors were wide open. Anybody could come here and settle whenever and wherever they wanted. At the turn of the 20th century, we were as dependent on cheap labor as we had been on slave labor a few years beforehand. Part of our new attitude, though, was out of concerns that occurred to us after World War I. We started to become concerned about our national security. But that was mostly a handy political excuse, because our immigration policies that were crafted in the early 1900s were explicitly to preserve homogeneity. They were to preserve the racial composition of our country the way it was then. That's what it was explicitly for. There have been other reasons. We've heard them all over the decades, but the original intent is still the engine that drives us today. See, we weren't afraid of being overrun by the poor. We had plenty of room, and we had plenty of jobs. And we weren't afraid of being overrun by radicals. We were afraid of being overrun by people who were not white, who were not educated, and who were not from Northern Europe. When you examine the documents and the legislation that went into creating our immigration laws, it's all laid out. It's all there. I have trouble finding that morally acceptable. Peter Morales, the president of the UUA, asked a question at one point. Who has a moral right to be here? Not a legal right, he said, but a moral right. Listen to his words. And here I must speak about the issue of some people being legal and other people being illegal. As a religious people who affirm human compassion, who advocate for human rights, who seek justice, we must never make the mistake of confusing a legal right with a moral right. The forced removal of Native Americans from their land and onto reservations was legal. The importation and sale of African slaves was legal. Later on in my lifetime, he writes, we had laws across the South designed to prevent African American citizens from voting. Apartheid was legal in South Africa. The confiscation of the property of Jews at the beginning of the Nazi regime was legal. The Spanish Inquisition was legal. Crucifying Jesus was legal. Burning Michael Servetus at the stake for his Unitarian theology was legal. The fact that something is legal does not cut much ethical ice. The powerful have always used the legal system to oppress the powerless. Yes, as citizens, we should respect the rule of law, but more importantly, our duty is to create laws that are founded on our highest sense of justice, equity, and compassion. And as Unitarian Universalists, we have a long and proud tradition of opposing unjust laws. For those of you who believe that our immigration laws are to protect our economic status, I'm going to offer you 5 myths that were posted in the Huffington Post a little while ago, and they were accompanied by documentation. Myth number 1: undocumented immigrants don't pay taxes. How many of you have heard that one? Quite a few, yes. Now the fact is, and this is from the chief actuary of the Social Security Administration, the fact is, while undocumented immigrants, they don't hold legal migration status, they generally pay a host of taxes. They file income tax returns, and more than 3 million have payroll taxes deducted from their paychecks. They pay about $100 billion into Social Security just in the last decade. And despite paying an estimated $13 billion per year into the Social Security system, undocumented immigrants only withdraw about $1 billion. That leaves the rest of us, folks, the rest of us, with a profit of $12 billion. Myth number 2: undocumented immigrants sap the welfare system. I've heard that one. Well, guess what? Without legal residence, they're ineligible for government assistance. Some point to the use of the child tax credit, but that money goes to support U.S.-born children, not the immigrants themselves. Myth number 3: undocumented workers drive down the wages of native-born workers. Well, a host of research, government and academic research, says they have almost no impact on our wages. The Federal Reserve Bank of Atlanta found they have a negligible impact on wages of documented workers. The study found that native workers earned about 0.15%, or about $56 per year less, at firms that hired undocumented workers. So their impact is negligible. The 4th myth is that undocumented immigrants are a drain on taxpayers. There have been a lot of aggressive attempts to study the impact of undocumented immigrants on taxpayers. And they have decided that over the long term, the tax revenues of all types generated by immigrants, both legal and unauthorized, exceed the cost of the services that they use. Undocumented immigrants, myth number 5, are stealing American jobs. Well, again, that's untrue. The U.S. Chamber of Commerce reported just a couple of years ago that undocumented immigrants generally offer different skill sets than native workers. They aren't competing for the same jobs, and when they are entrepreneurs, they create jobs that wouldn't exist without them. The report went on further to say, our economy doesn't contain a fixed number of jobs for which immigrants and native-born workers compete. It doesn't look like that. If all undocumented workers in the United States were deported, the U.S. would be affected because it would lose jobs, not make more room for native-born workers. The time to wait to get into this country legally, the time that we force people who want to come here and contribute to our country, the time that they have to wait is more than 20 years. More than 20 years. 4.4 million folks are in line right now for immigrant visas. To obtain citizenship, an immigrant needs to obtain a green card or permanent residency status. Then they have to wait. They have to wait 3 to 5 years before they can apply for citizenship. The time that they need to wait to get a green card can be 11 to 20 years. There are 11.4 million undocumented or unauthorized aliens in the U.S. In the preponderance of instances, with these 11.4 million people, they didn't creep and steal into this country illegally. Their visas expired while they were going through our process. Most of the undocumented aliens entered this country legally. I want to tell you a story about one such family, and it was the Alban family, and they were coming in here from Ecuador. One of the sons, Carlo Alban, was born in 1979, and he came here with his family, his father, his mother, and his brother Angelo. They had to leave his brother Paciale behind. His family worked with an attorney to obtain their green cards. They were middle class, well-to-do, and the first thing they did was they hired an attorney to help them. But that process took longer and longer and longer, and the rules kept changing on them, rules that were hidden from them. And instead of the 4 to 5 years that they had initially hoped, they had to keep resubmitting their forms over and over and over again. But during this time, Carlo, the boy, was hired. He got a job. He got a job in 1993 with Sesame Street. And he played the little boy Carlo on Sesame Street. The entire time that he was on Sesame Street, from 93 to 97, he lived in fear that they would be discovered. His life was very lonely. He couldn't go out and do anything with the cast, who were making friends. Ultimately, in 97, his family did obtain residency status, but that was like after he left Sesame Street. But that whole time, you remember him sitting there, with the grocer. He was living in fear. He has gone on to a pretty successful career in acting and writing. But he has also become a very eloquent advocate for immigration reform. Our laws, and the point that I want to make today, our laws have made 11.4 million people who live and work beside us invisible. And they're cruel. Carlo was able to be with his family, but his brother had to be left behind in Ecuador. If I were to characterize one thing that almost every person who's coming to this country from another country experiences, if I were to pick one thing, it would be traumatic separation. We separate parents from their children. I don't know if you know this, but if you are in this country, you get a green card, you're working through the process for 3 to 5 years, your children may not be allowed to come with you. You are given a month or two, a year, to go home and spend with your children. If you want to spend more time with them, if something happens, good luck. You go home to be with your children and you will be denied access back to the United States. So you'll be separated from your spouse. According to a recent New York Times article, nearly 40,000 such children, most of them from Central America, still tried to cross into the United States by themselves in the year that ended on September 30th of 2015. 40,000 children tried to join their parents by themselves. So far, as of the writing of this article, the Department of Homeland Security interviewed only 90 of them. Only 90 children in that entire year, after Obama had asked that these restrictions and that these processes be speeded up so that these children weren't left in limbo. Even after the children get here, they are not safe because of our policies. I have just one story to tell you about that. We have a UU minister. His name is Martin Wolf, and he married a woman from Spain, and together they had a 2-year-old daughter at this time. And his wife was coming back from Spain. She'd had a visit with her family, and he was waiting at the airport for them, and they didn't appear. And they didn't appear, and they didn't appear. And then finally, he got a call from her that she had been detained by our immigration services and that they were going to be deported back to Spain. He was not allowed to see them. He was not allowed to plead her case, that she has a resident alien card, she has a receipt from the INS itself showing that she had already applied for an extension to her visa, and their claim was that because her extension had not been granted, she was under suspicion. So they were deported back to Spain. It took a lot of weeks. It took his congregation. It took friendly senators. But finally, his family was able to rejoin him back in the States. We have 3 legal avenues by which people can come here. One is as immigrants, another one as refugees, resettled refugees, and a third one is asylum seekers. Our laws are supposedly for our protection, but they are carried out inconsistently, and they are vulnerable to political opinion. God help you if you are a Muslim seeking to make a home in the United States today. Our policies are based on fear, not legality, not economics, not anything other than fear. We are a country of immigrants, and it's time we reminded ourselves and each other of that. We've been so proud of all the immigrants and refugees that we have accepted. Well, guess what? That number has declined so steadily over the past 15 years that there's no difference between us and tiny countries who don't have room to bring in immigrants. Despite our efforts to open our doors, they're being overridden by politics. So I would say, in today's world, others desperately need to hear our voice, extending words of welcome across dividing lines, to respond to the politics of fear with one voice, to make the visible the people that are now invisible, and to help each other find the capacity to see as strong as we really are, to see us as just and compassionate as we really are, to affirm the truth in the public marketplace as much as we can. Anything can happen to us. Yes, we can be hurt. We can be hurt walking out the doors of this church. Anything can happen to us. We have no guarantees. But we don't have to make decisions about what is honorable in this country out of fear. We are covenantal communities. We bring our truth outside these walls and into the light of this world. Our immigration laws are here to stay for the foreseeable future. I would love to see them done away with altogether, but that's not going to happen. We can campaign for more fair and equitable and consistent immigration laws. We can ask our government to increase the numbers of refugees that we will accept. We can campaign to stop the criminalization of children. We can correct misinformation when we hear it. And we can create a safer and more sensible environment for immigrants who are in our midst. And finally, and not the least important, we can honor our own immigrant heritage and honor our diversity. Carlo Alban has said, it's all so fragile. We are all so lucky to be here. We should all acknowledge that, whether we were born here or our parents or ancestors made sacrifices to come here. Our response to all of this has to be welcome. Our response, like the Parisians of last fall, has to be to say that we are not afraid. Thank you all. Our final hymn of the morning is hymn number 1021 in the Teal hymnal, Lean on Me. Go out into the world in peace and have courage. Hold on to what is good and return to no person evil for evil. Strengthen the faint-hearted, support the weak, help the suffering, and honor all beings. Amen, and blessed be.